Okay, so I think most of you know what Autodoc is. It's this stuff that we see in documentation. This stuff is not necessarily that useful in a lot of environments because you want your documentation where you are, in the IDE or directly in Emacs or whatever. If you already have a library loaded, that's easy. You just type doc, or most things have stuff built in for the namespaces you have loaded. What I want to talk about tonight is more about how do we build tooling, and this is what you were talking about earlier, Ari, I think, that how do we build a little bit of tooling that allows us to import metadata about things that we may not have loaded and use those in IDEs and other environments. And I have a little sample library I'm going to show you guys how it works that we can build up for the documentation parts of that. So when Autodoc is built, it doesn't only build all this HTML, it actually also builds what we used to just call closure, and now we call EDN, to describe what the stuff that you went over looks like. So I have a project that called Autodoc Client, and this is what we're going to talk about now, that goes out and finds that in GitHub repos and allows you to sort of suck it into whatever program you're running. I'm going to show it at the REPL, but it could easily be built into any sort of IDE environment and gives you that, that stuff. So I'm going to demonstrate it by way of a demo, and hang on a sec while I make this bigger. Is that good for you guys in the back, or do you want it bigger than that? Okay. Okay. Let's thanks. Let's just look at it. So first of all, we just require this thing, and I'm going to require it like this. And then now what we can do is we can load anything, and I'm loading the document from the documentation from Incantor, and we just load it into the structure. And this goes and basically pulls that EDN structure down from this place on GitHub. It's actually wrapping off the screen here. I'm sorry, but so I can get that back on the screen. There we go. And it gets version 1.5.2 of Incantor, and it has all the documentation there. And now we can ask the documentation questions. Normally, you wouldn't be doing this at the REPL in this fashion. The idea is you build it into another tool. And so we can say, what are the namespaces in here with a standard thing? And this shows us all the namespaces that are in Incantor. Then we can say, oh, well, just show me the functions and arguments for things in the Bayesian analysis namespace, right? We have a few functions in here, and here are their arguments. There's a bunch more metadata about each of these things, but this is the stuff I'm interested in right now. And then we can also attach the source to this. This actually goes out and reads all the source off GitHub and chunks it up into and attaches it to the vars that it's done as best you can in Clojure. It's sort of an unpredictable problem, but and this actually surprisingly takes a few seconds longer. It will be done soon. It's faster on my network at home. You never know about GitHub, though. GitHub takes different amounts of time. And so the idea is that once you've done this, I'm just going to keep talking, and if it finishes, we'll look at it, because it's just going to show us what it shows us. If you do this, you can actually attach the source code for libraries that you don't have loaded at all into your world. And the basic one, here we go. So we'll actually show the source code for a function. So we can now look at, I want to look at the source for sample model params. Now, as you see, this library is basically a data structure, right? It's not an API in any sense, right? What it does is return data structure. And I'm writing lots of crazy code to fish stuff out of the data structure that I'm interested in showing you guys. It's easy to wrap it with an API, but that hasn't really been the point. And so we do that. And now we, oops. There we go. Now we actually can see the code that was the source code for this routine. Now, I don't have Incantor as a requirement here or anything. So really, this is just an example of using tools that produce both nice rich data like Autodoc does, and real data structures can be processed by other tools to feed, IDEs and all sorts of other tools as being part of our tool chain. And that's all I wanted to show. What? Yeah.
Question when we get the next speaker. What was the name of that?
It's called Autodoc Client. It's in my GitHub repo.
How are you mapping versions onto what's in GitHub?
So that's an interesting question. So Autodoc itself does versioning, and it will produce an index for each version that's considered part of the set, right? For Ncanner, that's about 4 different versions of Ncanner, although as far as I can tell, no one uses anything except 1.5.2 right now. For Clojure itself, that's everything from 1.2 up until 1.5.1, right, which is an interesting challenge. And each of those has a separate file. If you look in so Autodoc actually lives on GH Pages, right? And in the GH Pages branch of your GitHub repo. And so it puts the data structure there in each file for each version. So that's where I was picking it off from. There you go.